And good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Talent Anarchy's first ever 15-minute webinar on innovation and culture. We are excited to try this format with you, and we hope that you like it. A couple quick notes before we get started, and we are going to barrel through a lot today because we have limited time. We promised you we'd pack a punch. First, later today, you will be receiving by email our new white paper. If you like what you hear in the next 14 minutes or so, you will love what you get in the white paper when it arrives. We are also recording today's webinar, and we will share that with you as well if you'd like to share it with others or go back and check it out again. One note we want to share with you is that we are experimenting today with a new webinar platform and have been having some technical issues. We've been having some audio quality and audio delay issues. We've tried to mitigate as many of those as possible, but we do feel the need to apologize in advance in case something goes seriously haywire. But it may mean that we may be trailing just a little bit as we bounce back and forth between Joe and I. So please use the chat box in the lower left-hand corner to enter questions. We'll tackle questions at the end. You can also tweet us any questions to @TalentAnarchy, and we will try to pick those up as we go. So time is burning, so let's get moving. This is us, if you like to put faces with names. I am Jason Lauritsen. I'm the tall dark-haired one on the right. My colleague, Joe Gerstandt, is the bald gentleman there on the left. Joe will be joining us here in a minute. We are co-founders of Talent Anarchy. We're a training and consulting solutions company, and we help companies build cultures that fuel innovation. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is innovation. And before we get too far into that, we obviously hope we're going to give you some new ways to think about innovation. But before we get too far into that, we want to check your pulse. We want to see where you're at with innovation within your organization. So I'm going to pop up a quick survey, and I would love for you to quickly read and respond to this. It's a pretty straightforward questions. We just kind of want to see, how important is innovation to your organization, and how are you doing with it today? Excellent. I see the votes are sort of piling in, so pretty awesome. Well done. And all right, so because time's burning, I'm going to shut it down and share the results with you. Most organizations are telling us innovation is of increasing importance to them, and you see that there, and that innovation is probably more challenging than we anticipate. It's hard work. So let's start with, I guess, sort of a fundamental thing is, how do we define innovation? And we like this definition from Scott Birkin. Very straightforward. Innovation is significant positive change. It's a simple definition. But despite the fact that we can define innovation simply, I think a lot of us have discovered, as you just indicated, that the practice of innovation is certainly not particularly simple. We think a lot of that has to do with that we have some fundamental misunderstandings about how innovation works, and that sort of leads us astray when we think about how to approach it. One of the probably most significant misunderstandings is that we've been seduced by the idea that innovation happens sort of like a lightning strike. That a new concept is suddenly realized and everything changes in an instant. Well, the reality is something very different. The reality is that driving innovation is something much more like building a pyramid. Pyramids are built by placing one smaller stone on another, until after a while you start to see a mighty pyramid taking shape, right? The mighty pyramid begins to appear. Most innovation happens in the same way. One small insight or change or discovery stacked on another, until over time it appears to the rest of the world, or the rest of your organization, that a major innovation has seemingly happened overnight. But you certainly didn't get there that way. So I'm going to toss it now to my colleague Joe and let him unpack innovation a little further for you. Joe, take it away.
Thanks, Jason. And Jason has done a good job of starting to challenge some of the popular ideas around innovation, and I think some of the ideas that actually get in the way of us being innovative. Jason and I are both big fans of clarity, and I think maybe your first takeaway today, one of the most valuable things that you might be able to do is to go back to your organization and make sure that there is some clarity in place. If you're going to have conversations about innovation that are meaningful and actionable, is there a definition in place? Does everyone involved know what innovation is, and do they know how it happens? If we were to break innovation down, kind of building on what Jason has said, if we're going to break innovation down to its most fundamental, basic architecture, there are basically two things that need to happen. There's two things that we need to be able to do as organizations. The first thing that needs to happen, the first thing that we need to be good at is variation. Right? We need to be able to expose ourselves, our people, our processes to a wide variety of information, of ideas, solutions, tools, languages, practices. The more variation that we have access to, the wider the base of the pyramid is. And the second thing that we need is selection. We need to be able to take all of this stuff that we're exposed to. We need to be able to sort, select, prioritize, plan, etc., so that we can create something of value for the organization out of all of this novel and creative input. Variation and selection. You have to have both if you're going to be innovative. And the selection piece is really very well taken care of by the practice of traditional management. But the variation piece, equally as important, is something that really needs to be woven into the culture of an organization. And this is where we see a tremendous opportunity for improvement. Most innovation efforts that we see today inside of organizations are not really cultural at all, but they're more process-oriented. An organization decides that innovation is important, so we put together an innovation committee or we hire a VP of innovation rather than changing the mindsets and the behaviors that make up the organizational culture. So we have actually a pretty serious problem. Management is this powerful practice that's in place in business. We love management. We have been aggressively pursuing efficiency and productivity for a long time, and we've gotten really good at it. So our organizations already are very good at the selection piece, but at the same time, our ability to the variation side of innovation has kind of been atrophying. There's nothing really driving that and making that a priority inside the organization. So while employees continue to get more and more productive, we continue to find more and more efficiencies. At the same time this is happening, the organizational lifespan is actually shrinking, and it's shrunk quite a bit just in my lifetime. We're actually starving our ability to innovate because we're not very good at the variation piece. We're actually starving our ability to learn and respond and adapt as organizations. So we can talk about innovation as a strategy. We can talk about it as an opportunity for competitive advantage. And many of you, I think about 60% of you, identified it as mission critical at the beginning survey. But the underlying truth here is that for organizations, innovation is actually survival. Our ability to develop new products and new services, but also to innovate the way in which we do business and communicate and organize resources is increasingly important to the survival of organizations. Regardless of how good you are at what you do, the world around you is going to change, and it's changing faster and faster all the time. We live in a time of great volatility. We live in a time when technology is relentlessly disruptive. So what happens to your organization when the thing that you're good at becomes irrelevant or free? So here is kind of the inconvenient truth. While innovation has gotten more and more popular, one of the most powerful forces inside of our organization, management, the practice of management, is actually a big part of the problem. It's part of what's standing in the way of our ability to innovate. So inside some of your organizations today, there are probably places where groups of people have a hard time actually even considering new ideas because those new ideas don't come with a proven return on investment. That's a problem. That's how we starve ourselves of our ability to innovate. So we are not going to better manage our way towards more or greater innovation. But we do have some very real opportunities, we believe, to unmanage our way towards greater innovation. And I'll toss it back to Jason to talk a little bit about how that happens.
So the key to unlocking innovation within your organization is to create a culture that intentionally fuels variation. And to be successful requires focused and deliberate effort because, as we've already illustrated, management will present resistance almost immediately to these efforts. But, as Joe talked about earlier, that tension is healthy and it's needed in order to successfully innovate. So variation depends on a culture rich in three elements: connection, inclusion, and liberation. So I'm going to dig in just a little bit to each one of these. And we start with connection. Connection refers to the cultivation by each employee of a robust and influential network of relationships, both within the organization as well as outside of the organization. A broad, diverse network expands an individual's exposure to a vast array of people and ideas and perspectives. And this diversity of connection and diversity of exposure invites new possibilities, and those new possibilities ultimately provide really fertile soil for that variation that we desperately need to occur. Now, in 15 minutes, we don't have a whole lot of time to break down how-tos, but we're going to offer a few ideas for you to chew on. For connection, we need to make room for some socializing at work. In our quest for efficiency, as we've mastered the art of management, we have efficiently squeezed the organization of all of this space for socialization. We've squeezed that out of the organization. And this is a perfect example of how management will resist this kind of effort, that resists variation. When management sees a group of employees standing around in a hallway chatting or sitting down for coffee, they see lost productivity rather than the opportunity of connection and creation of connection. The second element is inclusion. And inclusion means that employees are willing and able to bring their authentic selves to their work and to support the same for those around them. Teams that share a diversity of experiences and perspectives have real advantage when it comes to things like problem solving and innovation, provided that those teams can find ways to include that diversity in the process. Inclusive groups are literally at greater risk of having the good ideas that fuel variation and ultimately that fuel innovation. So when we talk about innovation and how to drive that, one of the places we have to start is we have to embrace more dissent. Most organizations and leaders are terrible at conflict. We know this. They either avoid it or they turn conflict into an opportunity to bully someone else into their way of seeing things. And this chokes out the very diversity that we desperately need to fuel variation and innovation in our organizations. So we have got to get better at constructive conflict with one another. The final element is liberation, and liberation is about cultivating a mindset of ownership within the workforce. Liberation means owning the opportunity to shape your work for meaning and impact. Liberated employees have the tools and support to pursue their curiosity, to experiment, to ask for help, and especially to fail, because failure is such a critical component of innovation. And when you think about how to create liberation, we think there's a great model for experimentation that already exists, and it's called hacking. Hacking, by definition, is simply understanding the details of a programmable system. So for those of us in corporate America, think process. And using that understanding to make small changes that expand the capabilities of the overall system. Hacking's powerful to drive continuous improvement because it's built on the idea of experimenting with small changes. And the small changes are survivable when they fail, which makes it easy for everyone to practice it. Hacking can be a really powerful tool to create variation. So Joe, you want to wrap us up?
course, forget to push my mute button again. But thanks, Jason. I will wrap up very quickly. We've covered quite a bit of ground, but just to kind of summarize the key points, what we've talked about, innovation is important. It's important for a number of reasons in a number of ways, but at the end of the day, we can actually talk about innovation as the way that organizations are going to survive. And if we look at the statistics on organizational lifespan, that's becoming increasingly challenging for organizations large and small. One of the things that innovation really needs that also tends to be missing inside our organizations is variation, the ability to seek out ideas and information and practices from a lot of different sources and actually consider them and experiment with them. And one of the reasons why that's hard for us is because management is a big part of the organization today, and management tends to kind of skew away from things that don't go in straight lines and aren't incredibly efficient. Experimentation, variation by their nature aren't the most efficient. There's a certain amount of waste involved, and that's one of the reasons why you have managers that talk about the importance of innovation, but they're still getting in the way of some of the fundamental components of how innovation actually happens. So if we are going to be good at innovating as organizations, we need to push back or at least change the role. Part of it is changing the role of management inside of our organizations, especially focusing on how connected, included, and liberated we are inside of those organizations. So we are at 15 minutes. Thank you very much for logging in today. You're going to get a white paper that's going to show up in your inbox a little bit later on today that goes into this in more detail. But now we've got some time for questions and answers.